On the article by the New York Times, "Free Speech is Killing Us." Just as an overview, I would like to state the author's point of view, which is stated in the following quote: "I am not calling for repealing the First Amendment or even banning speech I find offensive on private platforms. What I'm arguing against is paralysis. This basically means that he believes in maintaining free speech while preventing us from being tolerant to hate speech online and on media and inflammatory content that could lead to violence." So I will explain this throughout the video. However, now I would like to just show my main points, which would be how media does influence violence, the power that we give to the First and Second Amendment, and how this can possibly be controlled. So these are things that he argues about throughout the text and that I will now analyze. So the first point, which would be how media does influence violence, is already given to us, like his opinion is given to us already through the title, which is, opinion, free speech is killing us. Noxious language online is causing real-world violence. What can we do about this? So, basically, he already just states that noxious language online is causing real-world violence, which basically means just posting and being tolerant to hate speech is actually causing hate crimes. So in the first paragraph, he states how previously, in the beginning of the decade, social media was actually a result against violence. For example, with the Arab Spring, which happened in Africa, that was extremely violent, and it was associated to social media that sticks and stones and assault rifles could hurt us, but the internet was surely a force of progress. So then in the next paragraph he states, no one believes that anymore. So he says that because the internet and social media were not at the all-time high they are at now. There are currently 3.48 billion users on social media apps, and the number is estimated to be growing at about 10% yearly. That is why in previous years it was simpler to keep violence from being influenced through social media, and that's why nobody believes the statement anymore. So throughout this paragraph, he also gives examples of different hate crimes that could have possibly occurred due to just tolerance on media. So the first argument he makes is how violence is affected by social media influence. Social media and the internet are now the main form of influence nowadays. Trends are bigger now than ever, and they are faster to access. It is not coincidental that so many more violent acts and hate crimes have occurred lately. So many shootings, for example, are copied and redone by other people. Maybe due to all the media coverage, but certainly because it is all out there and how easily people can be influenced. The El Paso shooting occurred due to a Trump supporter that basically did not want Mexicans passing the border. He was highly influenced by the president's political ideology and the party's political ideology that he went and took it into his own hands. Another example that he gives near the end of the paragraph is the following quote on the Christchurch gunman, which is, "The Christchurch gunman, like so many of his ilk, had spent years on social media trying to advance the cause of white power. But these posts, he eventually decided, were not enough. Now it was time to make a real-life effort post, which basically shows how easily things can go from being online to physical." So the author is basically saying that we should not censor political ideologies. We should just keep from being tolerant to hate speech and things that are causing real-world violence. In the fourth paragraph, he says that noxious speech is causing tangible harm. Yet this fact implies a question so uncomfortable that many of us go to great lengths to avoid asking it. He's basically saying that noxious speech causing tangible harm is factual, so he doesn't go into this deeply because it is a fact. He doesn't need to, and he probably does this consciously, stating that it is a fact, knowing it would add to his argument. So for the first main point, I think that the author went relatively well through it. He backed it up with with real-life occurrences such as the Christchurch shooting and the El Paso shooting, and he stated how the Christchurch gunman was this white supremacist that would constantly post on social media about his beliefs and his ideologies, and later went to murder 51 people, which is an exact just representation of the title, which is Noxious Language Online is Causing Real-World Violence. So I believe that the author went through this really well. He supported it concisely and made it easy to understand. So I personally believe that this point was well done. Okay, so now for the second point, which is the power that is given to the First and Second Amendment. So in the fifth paragraph, the author states a belief that is common throughout many Americans. The First Amendment is first for a reason. And he states that this is something that neither Republicans nor Democrats argue against, because they are both on the same field in this particular topic. Because, for example, if he gives an example of a conversation that he had at a coffee shop with a leftist, talking about the First Amendment and how he wouldn't censor anything because he wants free speech. He wouldn't censor media because he wants free speech. And then he also talks about a rightist and how they would not like us to censor, for example, memes about guns or anything because of the Second Amendment. So he basically says that these arguments are invalid because, for example, we are censoring incitement of violence and child pornography, which are also forms of speech. We censor them, and no one calls it the death knell of the Enlightenment. So basically he's just stating that we aren't giving it enough of a balance, and we're not controlling things as well as we could be, and we're not it's not equivalent, our values are not equivalent. So in the next paragraph he states, free speech is a bedrock value in this country, but it isn't the only one. Like all values, it must be held in tension with others such as equality, safety, and robust democratic participation. He's basically just stating that, yes, the First Amendment is important, however, we must keep our other values equal. And this, in the next two paragraphs, he basically states what my first statement was, what his viewpoint is. I am not calling for repealing the First Amendment or for banning free speech. I find offensive on private platforms. What I'm arguing against is paralysis. So, again, just like I explained previously, he is stating that he wants us to be intolerant to hate speech and to violent types of speech and noxious speech. Then he continues to make his third main point, which is how we could possibly stop this. So he says this in the paragraph where he states, Congress could fund, for example, a national campaign to promote news literacy, or it could invest heavily in library programming, could build a robust public media in the mold of the BBC, could rethink Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, the rule that essentially allows Facebook and YouTube to get away with the glorification of murder. If Congress wanted to get really ambitious, it could fund a rival to compete with Facebook or Google, the way the Postal Service competes with FedEx and UPS. Here, he supports his previous statement with simple ways on how it is possible to control hate speech by simply rethinking certain laws and opening new campaigns through the government. And then he also states how social media companies have shown how quickly they can act under pressure. For example, with the Christchurch crisis. It is possible for us to control these types of things and not be tolerant to hate speech because it is in the First Amendment. It is possible for us to stop this, how they have with the Christchurch and Charlottesville, for example, how companies have scrambled to ban inflammatory accounts, take down graphic videos, even rewrite their terms of service. So next, he states something that he spoke to John A. Powell about, which is a professor at Berkeley University. So this is a quote from John Powell. "We need to protect the right of speakers, but what about protecting everyone else?" So he's basically saying that if we were giving equivalence to, this is part more of the second main point, because he does bounce around the text talking about different points. But this relates more to the second point, which is about the power that is given to the First and Second Amendment. It's basically saying that we need to protect the rights of speakers, but we also, again, have to give equivalence to all of our other values. He continues to talk about this in the quote, "It's simpler to think only about the First Amendment and to ignore, say, the 14th Amendment, which guarantees full citizenship and equal protection to all Americans, including those who are harmed by hate speech." He said, "It's simpler, but it's also wrong." So basically, just to evaluate the second main point, I think that the author went about this pretty well. He found different sources, such as this law professor, John Powell, and he also gave examples of how social media companies have quickly taken down things while under pressure. And he gives a good example of how political ideologies are not something that are affecting this. It's simply people and tolerance that we already have. And then for the third main point, which is how this can possibly be controlled, he gives two different scenarios, which is such as the national campaign to promote literacy, or the rival competition for Facebook and Google, or the rethinking of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. He basically just states different ways that are possible for us to stop being tolerant to all this hate crime and all this noxious speech. So I believe that he also went upon this pretty well. He gave true examples of what has been happening. I feel like he maybe could have used some statistics, for example, on like different types of countries in which media doesn't affect violence as much because it is more controlled. However, I think this was a pretty good argument that he used to base his main point on. So it's pretty much that. That's my SLA. Thank you.